Welcome back to the programme. Thank you for your company. Now, in just over an hour's time, the final Prime Minister's Questions of 2017 will begin. I know. Hold on to your seats. Before they walk into the Commons to witness that exchange of views between Prime Minister Theresa May and Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, I am joined by three MPs. My final MPs panel of the year. What a treat we've got for you. The former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Environment, Owen Paterson, is here. Owen's been a Conservative MP for North Shropshire since '97 and is currently a leading supporter of the pro-Brexit group Leave Means Leave. A cause close to his heart is also elephant poaching. We like to try and tell you a bit about our MPs and who they are. Owen is currently encouraging people to take part in a consultation about the banning of UK sales of ivory. Let me welcome back to the panel again Tommy Shepherd, SNP spokesperson on the House of Lords, Scotland and Cabinet Offices, MP for Edinburgh East since 2015. He also supports animal welfare, even attending the Christmas reception last week, I'm told, for the cats charity Cats Protection. There
Absolutely.
we go. And Ian Murray, Labour MP for Edinburgh South. We try and find, obviously, all the ways we can link you. I think yours is slightly separate here. You've been from 2015 until 2017. He was the only Labour MP representing a Scottish constituency in the House of Commons. Slightly changed, of course, since then. He's a leading supporter of the pro-European Union group Open Britain. Like many MPs, though, he ran a competition to design his Christmas card, and I believe it was won by a little girl from called Catherine from Buckstone Primary School.
It is indeed.
Did she do a good design?
A fantastic design.
Can you describe?
2,500 entries. It's a flying reindeer, believe it or not, given it's Christmas.
Lovely stuff.
She did very well.
Congratulations to her. Let's get going. We'll talk about some of the issues, as we always do, in the news and how they affect you, and crucially what might or might not be happening to tackle those issues. Homelessness in England is in national crisis. This is according to a cross-party group of MPs, and of course an issue that many of us think about even more at this time of year as the temperatures plummet. The Public Accounts Select Committee report says there are more than 9,000 people sleeping rough and another 78,000 families living in temporary accommodation. The MPs say the government's attitude to tackling the problem is unacceptably complacent. In Scotland, it's no better. Recent figures show just under 12,000 people are sleeping rough or staying in temporary accommodation. It's predicted to go up by more than 50% over the next 25 years. And just last week, a survey suggested that 1 in 3 Scottish adults fear that they or a friend will end up homeless. And of course, we've got a range of MPs from the parties here to answer these questions. Owen, if I could start with you. The Labour government almost eliminated rough sleeping, and yet it's gone up by, do you know what percentage it's gone up by under the Conservatives?
What, in the whole, since the coalition?
Yes.
What figure have you got?
70%. Tonight, almost 4,000 people will be sleeping rough on the streets. How has this happened?
Well, that's the figure I got from the Centre for Social Justice that did a report on this in the spring. And I think you're quite right. This time of year, when the weather's really miserable like it was last week, and we're walking around Westminster to our nice warm flats, places where we go to live and work, and you see people out, I think it strikes everybody. And I think it is an issue which I think, in fairness, the government really has tried to help on. It's put significant sums of money into a range of different programmes. But I think what was interesting in the CSJ report, it's not just giving money to local councils and to local agencies. There's an awful lot that I think can be done on prevention. So if you look at the analysis of those, the 4,000 it was in the CSJ report, a lot of them have alcohol problems. They might be ex-servicemen with PTSD, having been traumatised in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think there's a lot more we can do in trying to catch people before they end up on the streets. And I think that's an area which does involve money, but I think an awful lot of other agencies can help.
But the Public Accounts Committee say the effect of benefit sanctions is to blame. The British Psychological Association has called for that system to be suspended. Is it time to do that?
I think it's a mixture of everything. I think it's...
But how could Labour have nearly eliminated it, and we're now in a position where you and we agree on the same figure? It's gone up, homelessness, by 70% under the Conservatives.
Well, I think if you take the ones I was talking about, ex-servicemen, there's been a significant numbers of servicemen who've been serving in Afghanistan and Iraq and have been traumatised. And that we do have people, sadly, with alcohol problems, drug problems and mental problems. And it isn't just a question of money. So the point I'm making is we can give money to agencies, we can give money to charities and councils, but I think that it's also work to be done trying to stop people falling through the hole and ending up on the streets.
Ian Murray, as a Labour MP, why do you think this has happened, and what do you want to see change?
Well, it's about government priorities. You're right to say the Labour government just about eradicated rough sleeping. And in fact, Scotland has some of the best homelessness legislation in the world. But it doesn't seem to have resolved the problem. It seems to have been getting worse since 2010 in both England and in Scotland. And to have anybody on the street, it's not just you think about it at Christmas. At any time of the year, anybody sleeping on the street is completely unacceptable. And there are societal problems. It is about universal credit and benefit changes. It is about marital breakdown. It is about addictions. But the bottom line is you have to prioritise it if you want to get people off the streets and into homes. And there's a supply problem. Supply and demand just doesn't meet the aspirations of people who want to be in affordable or social housing. And until councils can be given the ability to be able to build more homes, housing associations can be given the financial resources to build more homes, the supply problem and the demand problem will always be there. I represent a city, Edinburgh, who has one of the worst supply and demand problems in the whole of the country. It's very similar to London. Rents are spiralling out of control. Caps on benefits and caps on benefit caps have not helped in that particular situation, and the number of social houses has plummeted. And when you put all that into the same cocktail, you end up in a situation where people just can no longer live to afford to have a roof over their head.
Well, of course, you've mentioned Scotland. Tommy, if I can bring you in at this point. Official statistics last week show that more than 37,000 homes in Scotland have been left vacant for 6 months or longer. Can you just release some of those empty homes to help people?
Sorry, are those in the public sector or private sector?
Well, as I see, it was excuse me if I'm going to get this right, I think it was in the public sector, but I'll double check that for you now while we're on air.
I mean, that seems a high figure, but I think local authorities are doing their best to turn around empty properties as quickly as they can. I mean, but it's a very difficult situation. But I mean, I agree with I think pretty much all that Ian said. The important thing to understand is that this is a preventable tragedy. Homelessness is as a consequence of policy, and if we change policies and change priorities, then we can do something about it. And the fact that we have for decades now throughout the UK been selling off social housing and deregulating the private sector has meant that housing has become unaffordable for a great number of people. And when you combine that with the effect of benefit cuts and low pay and sanctions, then you get a situation where tragically people do end up on the streets. I think the important thing is what do governments do about it? And at least, I don't say that the situation is fantastic in Scotland, but I do say that at least the Scottish Government appears to be tackling this more at the centre of its priorities than is happening throughout the rest of the United Kingdom, as happening with the Tory government here. And it's beginning to pay some dividends. The problem is still massive, but the number of homelessness applications has fallen by 40% in Scotland over the last 5 years, which is a sign that the outreach work that we're doing, the increasing supply that we're doing, is having an effect. But this is against the backdrop of many things economically that we're not in control of. So until that changes, I don't think we'll eradicate the problem.
So in terms of Nicola Sturgeon promising £300,000 immediately for emergency accommodation, that's been welcomed by groups like Crisis UK. But at the launch of the homelessness plan in November, one homeless woman called out, "This is all publicity. The minute they go away, it'll all disappear and we'll be back. We'll get nothing again." It's just the question, really, why can't you seem to reduce those numbers? That's what I'm trying to get at. Because, of course, there's the will, that's what you're talking about, to do that. But the numbers seem to show a different story.
Well, I mean, in one sense, you can never do enough fast enough, but I think we're moving in the right direction. It would help if we had more resources available. It would help if we didn't have a situation where the UK government controls most of the welfare situation through the DWP, and in particular the sanctions regime, which is now being used to punish people rather than to correct behaviour, and is ending up putting people into a situation where they simply cannot afford it.
But most of the homelessness legislation and most of the battles against homelessness and rough sleeping, the responsibility falls on local authorities, and both the Conservative government at Westminster and the Scottish government at Holyrood have absolutely slashed local government funding to the bare bones. So local authorities don't have any money to build, they don't have any money to be innovative around homelessness legislation, they don't have any money to be able to put people into temporary accommodation. So it is about funding, and the fundamental principle is if you don't build enough homes and you have too many people, you have people who are homeless and you have people rough sleeping. And if local authorities aren't being funded properly, and local authorities in Scotland and England have the same problem. They've been absolutely cut and burned by central government. Then they won't have any resources to be able to deal with this problem properly.
I wanted to come back to you.
I don't think we disagree.
Well, I want to come back to you because you did ask me a question. 37,000 homes in Scotland. Those are private homes that landlords are holding on to, and it's still with this issue. The typical reasons why properties might be left empty for 6 months or more include necessary repairs, being stalled, or for financial other reasons, or locations being seen as run down or undesirable. It's a complicated picture across this, how you deal with it. If I was to understand then from you going into 2018, so we're looking back and looking ahead, Owen, from your perspective, from the Conservative perspective, is this a priority of the government to sort this out? Because these figures are undeniable in England.
Yeah, and just to pick up on what my two colleagues said, the government's putting in over 550 million into this specific area of homelessness, helping councils, the people Ian's talking about. But I think we're conflating two problems. One is the rough sleepers, where I'm talking about people who might have mental problems or addiction problems who we need to try and catch beforehand. The other are those who are caught up in the general housing crisis, which is caused by this tremendous pressure because last year, 230,000 net immigration. And that is putting huge pressure on housing. And, Tommy, Shelter, which I'm sure you would agree is a highly respectable charity, they reckon we need to build a new home. The last time I saw one of their papers, every 2 minutes to cope with the increase. So,
Tommy, why did you?
This is putting huge pressure on.
Why did you?
And in fairness, the government has got new. We got up to 217,000 houses last year. That was it was a huge increase. It's still not enough. Despite
this being on webcam, I do have to describe things. We're on radio. Tommy, you looked very unimpressed by that comment.
Well, I mean, I think it's irresponsible to try and connect a problem with homelessness with immigration, because what you're trying to do is to suggest to the public mind that this is the fault of immigrants, and that does nothing for good social relations and good community relations, and it's not really a proper answer to the problem.
People
I know who've come into Edinburgh, for example, they are not actually the ones that are in the homeless queue. They are the ones who are working. They are the ones who are renting homes in the private sector, and some of them are trying to get the money together to buy a home even in very expensive circumstances. So they are not contributing to the acute problem that we have in Edinburgh of homelessness and housing.
I think that is really unfair. If there is a huge increase in demand and supply is not keeping up, inevitably you're going to have a problem.
So build some houses.
Exactly, which we did last year, 217,000, and we plan to build more. But we are not keeping up as fast as highly respected charities like Shelter suggest. They're saying, we need a new home every 2 minutes, night and day.
So just to summarise your reasons there, Labour were able to nearly eliminate homelessness because there weren't as many servicemen and women who were in a very bad situation. We didn't have the pressures yet quite of immigration on the housing market, and the money had been spent in a different way or in a better way. I mean, I'm trying to understand the reasons why Labour was so close to eliminating it, and it's gone up by so much under the Conservatives.
I think we divide into two separate categories. There's the rough sleepers, the people we see on the streets around Westminster. I think they're the ones that get caught in what the Centre for Social Justice paper showed was a problem with addiction and mental problems, etc. But then you have an obvious problem if you have this massive increase in population and you don't increase the housing supply as fast as you are going to have a problem.
This is one of the manifestations.
Exactly, and that's why we built a record number of houses last year.
But it's still not enough.
The Cross-Party Public Accounts Committee called the government's response to rough sleeping and homelessness an abject failure. That's a government policy abject failure and a government priority abject failure. So you can bandy around servicemen, you can bandy around the immigration figures, you can create fear that immigrants are causing this problem when all the evidence shows that they're not. The Public Accounts Committee concluded in their report that came out that this was an abject failure of government.
And that is a cross-party group there that has come up with that, Owen. Let's move on. The cover of the Daily Mail this morning, Happy Christmas, council tax bills up £100. This is the news that councils have been given the freedom to put up bills by up to 6% without local referendum, without consulting local people. Half of the rise needs to be spent on social care. The rise means typical Bandee home will see their bills hit almost £1,700 next year. Owen, when real wages are declining, it's pretty bad news at Christmas, that, isn't it?
Yes, so I would advise councils to be very, very cautious if they do increase council tax. So in my patch, the Conservative Council has been really careful not to increase council tax, and it's won overwhelmingly in recent elections. And as a result, the last figure I saw, the average family in Shropshire's several £100 a year better off, about £700, which is significant. And I think one area we should look at is the efficiency of councils. So one thing we had in Shropshire, we used to have two-tier. We used to have district councils and we had a county council. And we got rid of the district councils. We have one unitary, so one group of people are accountable. There is absolute transparency about who is responsible for what. And we have saved.
But hang on a minute, the government.
We have saved significant sums of money. So,
but the government's made this change, and you're saying be very careful about it. But it's made this change because a lot of people would say that the social care costs have been passed over. The government's passed the buck to the local councils, which is the concern here. So you're saying be very careful about it. But if they need to spend the money and they haven't got the money from central government, they're going to have to put it up.
And the point
council taxpayers are going to have to pay for it.
Yes, and the point I'm making is there are always further efficiencies to be made. So if you looked around the country to see how many two-tier councils we have seen significant advantages in Shropshire having just one-tier council.
So keep trimming their own costs,
and we've saved a lot of money.
They don't have to put money up, buy those bills up by as much.
And just remember, people are pressed at the moment. It is not easy to find extra money. So I think councils have got to think very, very judiciously if they do use this new power.
I think some people, though, may say they find that hard to swallow when there's £1 billion for the DUP after a hung parliament after an election that didn't need to be called.
That's the point you could make as a political point that doesn't actually affect people on the ground in somewhere like Shropshire.
Well, I'm just saying when people are being asked for money themselves from their pockets. But back to you, if I go to you as a Labour MP, Ian Murray, it is a point where, first of all, you give more controls to councils, which is what actually Peter Dowd from your bench responded to and said he welcomed this morning. But also, we do need to fund social care, and this is a way of doing it. We aren't, in a situation where there's endless money for it.
Well, I'm a big devolutionist, and I think power should be devolved, but you can't just devolve power and responsibility without devolving the resources for it. And Prime Ministers and First Ministers in Scotland are very, very good at coming to the dispatch box and making grand promises about making sure social care is funded properly and passing the responsibility, therefore, back onto councils and saying that councils have to fund it. And the council tax then goes up, the councils become responsible for that, become accountable for that, but the credit then goes to the Prime Minister or the First Minister for having these grand policies. You have to fund things properly.
But Jeremy Corbyn's a big fan of putting up taxes, isn't he? So he probably welcomed this.
Well, they're devolving responsibility, but not devolving the ability to be able to pay for it. You're just saying we have a crisis in social care in this country, both in Scotland and in the rest of the United Kingdom. We're going to pass the responsibility of resolving that social care problem and crisis to local authorities. We're going to give them no additional resources, but we'll give them the flexibility to charge their council taxpayers an awful lot more money. That's not the way to deal with this particular problem. Central government has to come up with the resources. They have slashed and burned local authorities right across the UK for the last 7 or 8 years. It's unsustainable, and councils are now running on a shoestring with all the responsibilities of education and social care. All the big social problems in this country now land on authorities, local authorities, without the resources to be able to pay for them.
Tommy Shepherd, sitting there in the middle of Labour and Conservative here. Well, what's your take on this particular row? It is about devolving powers in some sense, but is it about the problem?
Yeah, but look, all local services, all council services are funded in two main ways. One is from the council tax, the other is from central government grant. So it's not rocket science to know that if you don't provide enough in the central government grant, then either council tax is going to have to go up or they're going to have to cut services which are already, in many cases, at breaking point. So, the Daily Mail is a bit disingenuous, to say the least, to complain about a £100 increase in council tax if it supports the government, which is cutting those central funding in the first place and making those increases necessary. So, and I think also at the end of the day, people understand that there's an equation here. It's not just how much you pay, but it's what you get as well. And if they pay £100 more in order to protect social care or keep the local nursery or community centre open, then I think, you have to say to people that's a price worth paying. Leaving aside the fact that, of course, that there may be better ways to fund local services than the council tax, and that local government finance might need urgent reform, but that's a bigger picture.
Emma, let me give you an example from the Scottish budget last week. The Scottish Finance Minister said that councils would be getting a real terms increase. Actually, it was a flat cash, and the only reason they would get a real terms increase is if they put their own council tax up by over 3%. So the Finance Secretary was championing the fact that he was funding local government, but actually he was saying to local government, if you want to be having a real terms increase, you have to put the council tax up by over 3%.
Yes,
people
can't afford that. The funding was maintained and not cutty, which is not the situation.
Flat cash is a 3% cut.
Final on this, Owen Paterson.
You have to keep making the broad point on public spending. When we came in 2010, we were borrowing as a country £300,000 a minute. We've got that down to below £100,000. But the other two have got to keep answering this question. How much more do we keep borrowing and dumping the debt on our children and our grandchildren?
Well, you give £1 billion to the DUP. You've given
out of 800. Come on,
tens of billions
you know.
of pounds of corporation tax.
So we are massively better off than where we were.
2%
under
in GDP.
You're all going for it.
Hang on, we are still borrowing. It's a lot better than it was. It's a third of where it was under Labour, but we're still borrowing about £100,000. That is
deficit
a very large sum which we're dumping on our children, our grandchildren. We cannot go on doing that.
It's a really good time to review the year in this very happy moment we found together on the MPs panel. Let me start with you, Tommy. I've been starting with Owen every time on all the questions. Let's mix it up. Do you think that trust in MPs has gone up or down after this political year we've had? What would you say? How do you think the feeling of the public is towards you guys?
That's a tough. I don't know if trust has changed. I mean, I think it was a pretty low ebb to begin with. I don't think that as a political class that we've done very much to reassure the public. I think the worrying thing, though, is that increasingly we are seeing people who put themselves forward for public services, MPs, or indeed at a local level as well, being hounded and vilified and mistreated in a way that is actually not just good. It's bad for them, but I think it's bad for democracy because it will actually make people think twice about coming forward to even stand at an election. And I think the treatment.
So this is some of the abuse online.
Well, some of the. I mean,
and in real life.
Yes, I mean the attacks that the likes of Dominic Grieve and Anna Soubry have had recently, for example, which people know about. But I mean, generally, a lot of the abuse and harassment, and the fact that social media has become a platform for people just spraffing off and attacking people rather than enhancing communication across humanity.
Does that bother you, Owen Paterson? Do you worry about those attacks from the general public?
Well, it's constant. I mean, only yesterday...
You say with a smile on your face. Go on.
Well, some of them are laughable. I mean, at the weekend, I retweeted an article that Ian Duncan Smith put in The Sun, and there was a glorious tweet yesterday saying, Owen Paterson, Ian Duncan Smith, The Sun, what a trifecta of, and on this public programme, I can't tell you how rude the word was. I mean, it is extraordinary that I think...
And do you laugh when you receive those messages, or do you sort of put your head in your hands?
Oh, I laugh it off, but... I mean, but for some of these cases, and particularly for some women candidates, for instance, in the election, they had a really terrible time. And this was really, really awful.
So it's been quite a torrid year in that respect.
Yeah, I think it has. And I totally agree with you. I think the tone has gone down. And people feel they are absolutely licensed, hiding behind anonymity on Twitter and other social media, to say extraordinarily rude things about people and get away with it with no comeback. I mean, I think they used to sit in the back room of a pub, half a dozen of them, being incredibly rude about their local MP or their local politicians.
But they just couldn't be bothered to write a letter.
They never wrote a letter. Now, suddenly, they have access to world media. Boom. And it's...
Well, some of them say, Murray, as we go towards Prime Minister's questions, they don't like the way you talk to each other in the chamber half the time with the braying and the shouting, but it's nowhere near what you're saying there. I do have to ask you who your MPs of the year would be. And I'm going to start with you, Ian Murray. Who would your MP of the year be?
Well, I went for Mike Gapes, the Labour MP, because he dressed up as Santa yesterday for a local group that he was presenting presents to, and I just think that Mike Gapes is the ultimate Santa. He's full of fantastic advice for us backbenchers. I sit on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee with him and does a huge amount of work locally, and I just think the stereotypical Santa is Mike Gapes. He'd be my MP of the year. He
would be yours. OK, Tommy?
Well, I'm going to pick a Tory, actually. I'm going to say Dominic Grieve, who I worked with for a few years in committee and who I know a little bit. And I think the way that he has stood out against tremendous pressure to stand up for what he believes in and what he actually thinks his party believes in is quite remarkable. And he's to be congratulated for it.
And as along your other point, he received death threats for doing
Indeed.
So. Your MP there of the year. Owen, who's yours?
Well, Dominic's a very good friend of mine, but I would choose another Tory. I would go for Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is, I think, wholly
Some
splendid.
Laughter here from your
but I think
panellists.
He's wholly splendid in that he has very clear beliefs, which he does not compromise at all in the way he expresses them. He can go on the most difficult sort of media programmes, quiz shows, comedy programmes, and hold his own. And I think he's an example to us all for getting into politics after a business career and knowing where he wants to take this country and being completely consistent and open and honest and extraordinarily courteous with all people at all times.
It sounds like you're pitching to be in his cabinet.
It does. Do you want him to be leader?
I don't think he wants to be leader.
But you sound like you want him to be leader.
You could be in his cabinet, and it would be fantastic.
I
wouldn't
do
it?
think-
for the
no, come on. The usual
Absolutely.
answer to this question is we don't have a vacancy. So all journalists
But
get
if he
around to
was,
meeting
it
contact.
sounds like you would be very happy with that from that ovation almost from you. Because actually I did read out a message from Rob when we were asking for New Year's resolutions earlier. He said the New Year's resolution for Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn should be that they both resign. They're as bad as each other. Jacob Rees-Mogg for president, not even Prime Minister.
America.
There is a thought.
I'd have him replace Trump, although maybe not Prime Minister of this country.
Right, well, jobs are all going around, it seems, but not at the moment. And Trump, of course, may be visiting these shores very soon. So that will be another discussion for another day. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Thank you very
Merry
much
Christmas.
for being my final MPs panel
Happy Christmas.
of 2017. That was Owen Paterson, Tommy Shepherd and Ian Murray. Off to the chamber, as we will be soon at just gone 12 for the final PMQs of 2017. Keep your New Year's resolutions coming in. Perhaps you want to nominate your MP of the year. 0808 5909 693 850 58 on the numbers you need. It's 11:32. Let's get the latest headlines.
More live Premier League football than anyone else. This is BBC 5 Live.
With the 5 Live News, I'm Alison Acton. The Justice Minister has told 5 Live Daily that the dropping of 2 rape cases is deeply